Hello and welcome to Red in April Off-Grid. We are building our homestead completely off the grid in the Arizona desert. Our son Kyle owns a plot of land next to ours and he's been building a Hyperadobe home, and lately we've been helping him with his build. We have a lot going on in today's episode. We'll be finishing the whitewash on the interior walls and also putting the top coat on the earthen floor. We will also finish sealing up the house and getting it all dried in, and then we'll get started on the shower. Kyle is mixing up a batch of lime whitewash here. He's just using lime type S and water and mixing it to about the consistency of milk. He's been working on this off and on, and we're hoping to get it finished up today. Right now is an ideal time because we're waiting for the first coat of the earthen floor to dry, and we want to get the lime wash completely finished before we put on the top coat of the earthen floor, just so we don't make a mess. And this has been a very messy process. We've been using a brush to apply it, and you get a lot on the floor. Basically, with each brush stroke, every time you dip the brush into the container that you're holding, you have to kind of scrape to the bottom and kind of be continually stirring the lime wash. So when you bring the brush out, it's fully saturated and you kind of have to just splash it on the wall, and it's a little messy. And eventually Kyle figured out that he could just use a roller for this, and he's dipping it into the bucket and kind of stirring it around and bringing it out completely saturated and going onto the wall with that. So it's making a pretty good mess, but it's also making this process much faster. The roller worked really well. It was much faster than the brush. We ended up putting on 2 good coats and then touching up as needed. It does dry a lot whiter than it goes on, because when you're first putting it on, it's kind of soaking into the dirt and it doesn't look very white, but as it dries, it really brightens up. So the finished product here is a very bright white. This should really help to brighten up the space. This lime whitewash is an interesting product. It's been used for centuries and it has some really nice benefits. We like it because it's inexpensive. The S-type lime is very inexpensive. Kyle ended up using about 1.5 bags to do this entire space. It's also easy to mix and use. And once it's applied to the walls, it makes a breathable coating that is also mold and mildew resistant. We have heard that lime wash may fade over time, but it's easy to touch up or reapply as needed. Here I am going around just doing some touch up on the paint on the ceiling. Kyle has also been doing some touch up on the ceiling paint and the lime wash. We're just trying to get everything ready so we can start on the top layer on the floor. As you can see, the lime wash dried to a nice bright white, and now we're starting to prep the floors. We did get a lot on the floors, but it was easy just to sweep off anything that was loose, and then we should be ready to go on with the next coat. Here Kyle is starting to gather up the materials that we'll be using for the top coat on his earthen floor. Kyle is gathering dirt from the spoil pile that was left over from his septic dig, and he's putting that through the sifter here. And then the sand we've already gathered up from elsewhere on the property, that's in the trailer over there. He's sifting that as well, and we're just using a 5-gallon bucket of soil and a 5-gallon bucket of sand in each batch. Kyle just dumps both of those buckets in the mixer and then starts mixing and starts adding the water. And he adds water until he gets a consistency that's muddy and spreadable, but not too muddy. And I'm on the inside spreading the mixture out on the floor. Each batch is going a lot farther than it did in the base layer because I'm only going 1/2 inch to 1 inch thick as needed. I'm just using my hands to spread it out initially. I get it just slightly higher than I want, and then I use the trowel to work it and get it all nice and level and smooth. When I was doing the floor in our house, I tried using a level to get it perfectly smooth and level, but I found that I got better results just doing it by eye, and so that's what I'm doing here. Experience is definitely helping here, and I feel like it's relatively level and looks pretty nice. This top coat mix is looking pretty sandy, and that's what we were going for. The sand helps prevent cracking. The soil that Kyle is collecting from that spoils pile seems to be just perfect for this. It has some clay in it, but it's also fairly sandy, and so when we mix that with the 1/2 part sand, we're ending up with a mixture that has a lot of sand in it, but still enough clay, and so far it really looks like it's not going to crack very bad at all. It's looking really stable. We used the same ratio of dirt to sand in our top coat on our earthen floor, and it cracked quite a bit, and we think that's because our soil had a lot more clay in it and less sand, and so that clay ratio was higher. We wanted the cracks in our floor. We really like the look. We think it adds a lot of interest and character to the floor, and we plan to fill those cracks in before we put on the finished layer of linseed oil. But that ended up being quite a bit of work and took a long time to fill in those cracks with fine sediment and sand. You have to work it in several times. It keeps sifting down through. And so we wanted to be able to skip that process with Kyle's floor. And so far it looks like this top coat mixture that we're using with his soil is very stable. It's not cracking at all. And here we are the next day. We're hoping to finish it up today. We're working on the last section. The work that we completed the previous day is drying out and not cracking at all. It's looking really good. Very pleased with that. This mixture really seems to be ideal. This texture is just perfect. It's really sandy, but yet when I work it, it brings up the cream to the top and I get a nice smooth surface when it's worked. So this seems to be just perfect. It's fairly sandy, but still has enough clay to finish really nicely and hold itself together. I'm using a concrete edging tool to create a little bullnose edge where it joins the concrete and creates a nice transition. I'm using a wet rag to wet down the base layer before I add the top coat. I think this helps the coats to bond better. It also just wets down the base layer so that it doesn't try to wick the moisture out of the top layer and allows it to dry slower. Also of note, we did allow the base coat to dry for about a week and a half before applying this top coat, and we realized that the base coat probably isn't completely dry, but it will continue to dry as the top coat dries as well. It's very satisfying how quickly this top coat has gone on. It goes a lot faster than the base coat just because each batch of material goes so much further since it's such a thin coat. I've been trying to do this in long, thin sections so that I can reach it, and the edges have been blending together really nice. If the previous batch is a little bit wet, it blends really easily. And here's a look at the finished floor. It's been a couple of days and it's drying out nicely. We're very happy with the way it's turning out. It's not cracking at all as it dries. We'll let this dry for about a week and then we'll be ready to seal it with linseed oil. While we were waiting for the floor to dry, we went ahead and installed the front door, which we showed in our last video. There are areas that we needed to walk on while we were waiting for it to dry, and we put foam board down to protect it. It's drying out nicely in this hot, dry weather with plenty of circulation, and it has a nice texture. Well, it's been about a week and the floor is looking completely dry, and we're getting ready to apply the sealer. But before we did that, we decided to go ahead and remove the tape from the outlets, clean up around the portholes, and sweep up the resulting debris. At this point, it's perfectly fine to walk on the floor. It's good and solid. It won't hurt a thing, but it would wear over time if you didn't add the next coating, which will be the linseed oil. At this point, the concrete pad that we poured in front of the front door is also dry, and so we're removing the forms for that. That's always a satisfying process. And now Kyle is getting ready to apply the linseed oil. He's mixing 4 parts boiled linseed oil to 1 part odorless mineral spirits. He's starting out by using a brush to go around and get the edges covered, and then he'll use a roller to finish up the middle of the surface. Coating the floor with linseed oil is an important step in the process. It adds a good deal of water resistance to the surface and also increases its durability. Boiled linseed oil works great for this because it's a polymerizing oil, which means that it has molecules in it that form long-chain polymers when exposed to oxygen. It sets up kind of like a plastic, and so it sinks down into the surface of the soil and then forms these polymer chains, and it really forms an incredibly durable surface. Because those polymer chains are very similar to plastic, it resists water penetration, and so that's of course great for a floor, so it makes it to where you can mop the floor to clean it in the future and water doesn't hurt it. It also makes it much more resistant to foot traffic wear. So instead of being able to rub your foot on it and wear down into it, it'll resist that because it's this hard plasticky type surface. It resists that wear, and so it makes it a very durable surface and makes it to where you can walk on it and clean it without it wearing out. There are other polymerizing oils that you could use for this. One other prominent candidate is tung oil. We chose to go with linseed oil because it's less expensive, quite a bit less expensive than tung oil. It also dries faster than tung oil does. Boiled linseed oil will be mostly dry or cured within about a week, but it will continue to harden and cure for about a month. It is important to note that the fumes from boiled linseed oil are toxic, and you need to be wearing a good respirator for this process, which Kyle does have. But once it finishes curing, it's generally considered non-toxic. It's interesting to consider that polymerizing oils like this have been used to seal earthen floors for a very long time. But before that, they had some interesting methods. One that we read about was that they would use ox blood from a freshly killed ox to seal their earthen floors. I presume that the ox blood would soak into the pores of the floor and congeal, doing something like a polymerizing oil. It's also interesting that linseed oil is one of the main ingredients in linoleum, a famously hard-wearing flooring surface. As you can see here, for this first coat, Kyle is just pouring it out onto the floor and then using a long-handled paint roller to spread it around. On the first coat, you really want to flood the surface and allow it to really soak in. And it really does soak in a lot. This first coat takes a lot of product, and each subsequent coat takes less and less. This first coat really darkens the surface, and between each coat it lightens quite a bit, but each subsequent coat makes it permanently darker. So after 4 coats, it appears to be fully saturated and a nice even dark tone. And here it is all finished up. It's dried to a nice chocolate brown color and has a really nice tone and texture. Kyle ended up using 6 gallons of the boiled linseed oil and about 1.5 gallons of the mineral spirits. While that was drying, Kyle sealed the stucco with a concrete sealer. He bought it in a concentrated form and then applied it with a hand pump sprayer. This helped create a waterproof barrier on the outside. Water actually beads when sprayed onto it. And now onto the portholes. Kyle plans to leave these open for ventilation through most of the year, basically all except for the coldest winter months, and so for now we're just putting a screen in place to keep bugs out. It's important to note that these portholes are about 20 inches deep and they're tilted down towards the outside, so any water that's blown in there when it's raining or anything will just drain towards the outside of the house, and he'll have the option, of course, of completely blocking them in later if he wants to. We had to get creative in figuring out a way to add some screening material to these portholes. In the end, we're just using some aluminum screen material and pipe clamps turned inside out. This screen material is easy to work with. Because it's aluminum, you can actually cut it with scissors, which always surprises me when you can cut metal with scissors. And the pipe clamps worked really well. You just turn them inside out and then you can use the screw adjustment to tighten them up. It worked better than expected. It was a little tricky getting your hands in there to use the adjustment screw. We finally found a short screwdriver that made it possible. These portholes have ended up being a really nice addition to the home. Each one of them is kind of like having a light on all the time. It's free, natural light, and they bring in more light than you would expect. There's 3 that are 6-inch tubes, 6-inch wide, and 3 that are 8-inch. And here's the last opening that we need to seal in to complete the dry-in process. It's an opening that we had left in preparation of the possible addition of an evaporative cooler, but for now we're not sure if we need one, so we're just going to seal it up temporarily with plexiglass. We had a couple of scrap pieces of plexiglass that we used, and we didn't have the right color of sealant. We just had some white silicone that we used, so in the end it wasn't real pretty, but it did work and we got it all dried in. And now I'm getting started on the shower. This is an interesting challenge because we're putting it in the corner and it's a radius corner, so this whole surface of the shower will be curved. And in order to do that, we've decided to use a metal siding for the sides of the shower, and in order to attach that to this earthen walls, I'm attaching some furring strips. I'm wearing a good cartridge respirator with organic filters here because the linseed oil floor sealer is still drying. And while I was working on that, Kyle installed the ceiling fan in the main living area. This will help with the air circulation and help the floor dry faster. Working with these earthen walls does add some special challenges. They're not particularly level, they're kind of lumpy, and I need these furring strips to be level and straight. So I'm putting a level on there and I'm shimming as needed to get them level and plumb. To attach these, I'm using 6-inch nails. I'm pre-drilling through the wood and about 2 inches into the soil and then driving the nail in. We found that to attach things to these earth bag walls, nails work really good. We tried screws and they just seemed to strip out. They would catch and pull out the sand and ended up not having any secure attachment. But the nails, when you drive them in, seem to compress the earth even more and they hold really well. With the furring strips attached, I'm ready to start working on the shower base. But before I did that, I wanted to go ahead and remove the cob that was applied to the bags for about a foot from the base, about a foot up. I want to go over that later with some stucco so that I have something really good to attach the shower pan liner to. And now we're getting ready to pour the concrete base. I've already put in a piece of 3-inch PVC around the drain pipe coming up to keep the concrete away from that, and I've got it cut off to the right elevation, and I'm wetting it down, and now we're gathering up the materials and getting ready to mix concrete. And here I am gathering up some rock for the concrete. I might mention here that this huge pile of rock that you see here, we've been using rock from this throughout the build on this house. It's been really handy, and it just came our way in a very fortuitous manner. It was during the construction of our daughter and son-in-law's septic system. The people that were doing it just happened to be there and had all of this rock that they needed to get rid of and wanted a place to dump it. And so all this came to us for free, and it's been really useful. And it's been sweet of our daughter and son-in-law to let the whole family use it. We even use some of it in the floor of our house. And now we're ready to start mixing the concrete. Kyle is going to be doing most of the mixing on the outside, and I'll be bringing it in by bucket and doing the pouring and leveling on the inside. I intentionally left this spot open and didn't pour it when we poured the rest of the bathroom pad because I wasn't sure about the elevations. The elevations are really particular, and there's several steps involved here, and I didn't know where exactly it would be, so we decided to just pour the rest of the pad and leave this spot for the shower base open and pour it later once I got all the elevations figured out and correct, and I'm glad I did it this way. We ended up settling on an elevation that's slightly below the elevation of the rest of the bathroom floor. I've marked the elevation that I need to finish to on the sides of the concrete pad that I poured, and so I'm trying to level to that. This is just our base concrete slab layer. I'll be finishing this concrete to a level surface, and then in the next step, I will be creating a tapered surface that comes down to the center drain. This is going pretty quickly. It just took a few batches to mix up enough concrete to finish up this little job. And now it's all finished. It's cured for a couple of days, and I'm actually standing in it while I apply some whitewash to these walls. I also ended up attaching another furring strip to the wall just to make sure I had enough attachment points to attach the metal shower walls to. To cover the shower walls, we plan to use a galvanized metal roofing that will follow the radiused contour of the wall. We decided to paint this area behind the wall with this whitewash because it adds a mold and mildew resistance. And Kyle is outside mixing up some stucco, and you can see April doing some detail work underneath the eaves in that gap between the eaves and the sidewalls. And I'm going to be using some of that stucco to make a smooth surface around the base of the shower wall to attach the membrane to. In our next episode, we'll be working on this unusual shower, and we'll also be starting on the cabinets.
Thank you for watching. Be sure to subscribe and join us again next time.